All right, guys, welcome back to the third and final chunk of Section 2, where we are talking about sociological crime theories. So remember, criminology was originally a part of sociology, so the vast majority of the criminology work has been in these sociological theories. Okay? So, most of these theories, the earliest of these theories can be traced back to the 1930s. Okay? And then some of them are newer and newer and newer. The basic theories that we're going to be talking about today, the beginnings of this, started in the 1930s, to give you a little bit of historical context of what we're talking about here. And one of the first was a theory called social disorganization. Okay, so way back in the day, there was this guy named Burgess, and Burgess looked at Chicago, and he noticed that as Chicago, the city of Chicago, was growing throughout the 19th and early 20th century, it did so in this kind of predictable pattern. Okay, and he realized that Chicago grew in kind of rings, like a target, right? And of course, it butted up to Lake Michigan, so it's kind of like half a ring, not a full ring, but you get the point. So in the innermost zone was the commercial area, right? And the commercial area downtown, that's where all the big high-rises were, where all the businesses are, where all the, kind of major economic activity is going, right? Zone 2 was the oldest residential area, and as the economic zone grew, the industry was encroaching on this residential area. So the factories were coming in, and these crappy old houses were on their way out. As it grew, Zone 2 grew with it. And then Zones 3, 4, and 5 were, assorted different residential areas with, the suburbs and all those things, where the rich and the middle class lived. But Zone 2 is where the poor lived. And in 19th and early 20th century America, the poorest people, especially in a city like Chicago, were the recent immigrants, right? And immigration came in waves, right? So it was, the Italians came in a wave, then Irish people came in a wave, and Chinese people came in a wave, and kind of the history of American society is a history of these immigration waves, and there has been a lot of different study done on these different immigrant waves. So Burgess comes up with this zone theory. Then these two other guys named Sean McKay, they look at it and they say, look, all the crime, or almost all the crime, is happening in Burgess's Zone 2, right? Where all the immigrants live, where all the poor people live, where the factories are encroaching on the residential areas as Chicago grows. There's a huge amount of the crime happening in that zone. Why? Now, if you had asked a normal kind of American Chicago citizen at the time, why is the crime happening there? They would probably answer, because of the immigrants, right? We have a long history in this country of saying that immigrants are criminals and bad people, and why are we letting in these immigrants? They're all obviously bad people. It happened to the Italians, it happened to the Irish, it happened to the Chinese, it's happening now to the Mexicans and other Central American and Hispanic groups. You can really track the periods of American history by which immigrant wave was coming through, and those immigrant waves always, always, always have this reputation for being criminal. So Sean McKay looked at it and said, no, it's not the immigrants. Because when the Italians were in Zone 2, there was a lot of crime in Zone 2. But then as the next wave was coming in, and the Italians, the second, third generation of Italians were actually starting to make some money moving up into the middle class, they moved out to the outside zones, but the crime stayed in Zone 2 for the new wave of immigrants to come in and get accused of being criminals. And then when they, second generation, third generation, started moving away and a new wave of immigrants started coming in, the crime again stays in Zone 2. Right? So they're saying it's not the fact that you're an Italian or Irish or Chinese or whoever. It's that you're living in this socially disorganized area, this Zone 2 area, okay? people, essentially, with social disorganization, it's about people don't know their neighbors. People don't have a sense of pride in their area. People don't know their neighbors. People don't interact with their neighbors. People don't care about, the trash on the streets and the vandalism and the this and the that. So crime is really a matter of geography. Crime isn't a matter of who you are or what immigrant group you belong to or anything like that. Crime is about where you live. Crime is about this inability to connect with the people you're living around, which causes social disorganization, which causes crime. Does that make sense? Now, around the same time, there was this other guy, Sutherland. And Sutherland says, look, crime is learned. It's learned behavior, just like any other behavior, right? You get conditioned into committing crime. When we're young, when we're very young, we learn how to live, how to talk, how to, everything from how to eat with a fork to socialization, which is the really important process, from our parents, right? But then once we hit kind of our early teens, the primary teacher for us is no longer our parents, it's our peers, right? So our peers, we learn from them kind of how to act in a peer group, how to act in schools, and all these things. And what Sutherland says is people learn to be criminal. So if their parents are criminals or if they're hanging out with the wrong crowd when they're teenagers, they're going to learn that crime is the thing to do. And there's two different kinds of learning. First, you learn the techniques of crime, right? So if you're going to rob a car, this is how you, open a locked car door, and this is how you hotwire the car, and this is how you, get away with driving a stolen car. But you also learn what he called definitions about kind of that committing crime is an expected thing. It's an understood thing. It's normal, right? So if I grew up and my parents never committed crime and I never saw them commit a crime, and my peer group, when I was a teenager, I didn't see any of them committing a crime, right? Then I will learn that committing crime is not a normal thing to do. Not only am I going to not learn how to do it, I'm also going to learn that it's not expected. It's not normal. It's not a thing. Whereas if my parents are criminal and my peer group is criminal, I'm going to be raised thinking, oh, this is normal. I'm supposed to go out and steal cars. That's okay. Like, I'm going to go out and steal cars now. So that's learning theory, all right? Now, again, around the same time, there was another kind of theory going around. And the first big person to talk about strain was this guy named Merton, okay? Robert Merton comes along, early 30s, I want to say, maybe mid-30s, late 30s. And he says, look, crime isn't geographic. Crime isn't learned. Crime is economic, okay? So, we've all heard of the American dream, right? What's the American dream? The American dream is, I want to grow up and have a nice big house in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a wife and 2.5 kids and a dog and drive a fancy car and, go on trips to the Italy in the summers or whatever, right? That's the American dream. And that American dream is primarily economic, right? So the problem is the vast majority of us are never going to be rich. We're never going to be rich, right? There's 330 million Americans right now. Very, very few of us are ever going to be rich. I mean, there's always those stories we hear about of, being born in poverty and growing up to be a gazillionaire, like Bill Gates and Eminem and all these famous people who went from nothing to super rich. But at some point in your teenage years, maybe your 20s, you learn, you know what, I'm never going to be rich. And this causes strain, okay? This desire, I want economic success, but I'm not going to get economic success, causes strain, right? And there are, according to Merton, there are 5 adaptations to this strain based on whether you accept or reject the goals of society, i.e. that economic desire to be rich, and the means, okay? So I'm actually going to pull out, let's see if we can get Microsoft Paint to work here. I don't even know if Paint is installed on this computer. Oh, sure enough, look, Paint. Okay, so we need a line. Okay, so, all right. So we've got these 4 zones, okay? Here we've got the goals and the means. We've got accept, we've got reject. Oh wait, I messed this up. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Sorry, a little technical difficulty. So goals. Up here is means, okay? And we've got accept and reject. Okay, so there are 5 adaptations to strain according to Merton, okay? The people who accept the goals, i.e. they still want to be rich, they still want to chase the American dream, and they also accept the means, the socially approved means to reach those goals, okay? What are the socially approved means to reach those goals? Work hard in school, get a college degree, get a job, work 9 to 5, dress in a suit, and drive into work every day, right? Those are the socially acceptable means to reach those economic, socially desired goals, right? So people who accept the goals and accept the means, and they just keep on chugging, and they try to go on and keep, bringing home the bacon, if you will. These are conformists. And back in Merton's day, this didn't have the kind of negative connotation that it gained in the 90s with all the goth kids being like, you conformist, and if you're old enough to remember the 90s, then you are definitely old enough to remember this becoming kind of a pejorative term. And there aren't a lot of criminals here, right? So of the 5 categories, not a lot of criminals here in the conformist category because you're too busy working hard and going to school and going to work and doing all those things, right? Now, if you accept the goals of society, or let's do this one first. If you accept the means of society, but reject the goals of society, you become what's called a ritualist, okay? So I've accepted that I have to go to work every day. I've accepted that I have to go get my college degree. I've accepted that I have to go do this and call my boss, yes sir, or yes ma'am, or whatever. But I don't care about the goals anymore. I know I'm never going to get rich. I'm just doing this because I know I have to. Like, my maternal grandfather was a perfect example of this. Like, he would come home to a wife I really don't think he liked very much anymore and just go to work every day, and he was just miserable until he got down in the basement and started working on his radios, which was his thing. But he was a ritualist, okay? Again, not many criminals here. These are people who are just going through the grind 9 to 5 and don't really care, okay? Now, the other 3 groups are where you find the criminals, okay? So let's say we accept the goals, the monetary goals. We want to get rich. We want to, have the white picket fence and the kids and the Cadillacs and all that stuff. But we reject the means. We don't want to go to school. We don't want to go to work. We don't want to work 9 to 5 for a boss we hate. These people are called the innovators. Innovators. They do something different to earn money. They do something different to show that they can become rich, right? Now, these are not necessarily criminals. Bill Gates was an innovator. He did something nobody else had done before and innovated his way into making $1 gazillion, right? But there are a lot of criminals in this sector, right? Gang members, right? Gang members, they're selling drugs. They're trying to run, the mafia. They're trying to get rich. They're trying to obtain that economic goal, but they're doing it in a non-socially approved manner. They accept the goals. They want the money. They reject the means. In other words, they break the law. They do it in a non-socially expected manner to get that money, right? So again, a lot of criminals here, but they're not all criminals. Not all innovators are criminals, okay? Finally, we have, or second to finally, I should say, we have the people who reject the goals, meaning they don't care about money, and they reject the means, i.e. they don't care about, going to school and getting a job and everything. These people are the retreatists, okay? Now, retreatists, these people are just the kind of, you ever known someone who was just out of it? They didn't have a good job. They didn't do anything. They lived in a crappy apartment, or maybe even they were homeless, and they didn't, they just, one of those people who just don't care, right? That's a retreatist. I have known numerous people, especially from high school, who were retreatists. In the criminal category, in this instance, you have not a lot, but people like drug users, right? So like if you're a heroin addict or an opium addict or whatever addict, and you just spend all your time getting high, doing barely enough to be able to afford to get high the next time, right? That's a retreatist, okay? Now, I said there were 5 adaptations. This is only 4. Where's the 5th, right? So the 5th is the people who come along and they say, look, this entire thing, no, we reject this entire concept. We hate it. It's stupid. These people are called the rebels. Once again, rebels aren't necessarily criminal. The founding fathers of the United States, they were rebels, okay? But a lot of them are criminals. And you can go to everything from motorcycle gangs, if you've ever seen that show, Sons of Anarchy, right? Sons of Anarchy, they were rebels, okay? Also, people like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Y'all ever heard of Ted Kaczynski or the Unabomber? He was a big thing in the 90s. Anyway, he was a rebel. He wanted to kind of destroy this whole system and replace it with his own, okay? That's a rebel. So those are the 5 different adaptations to strain according to this guy, Merton, okay? And since then, there have been other strain theories, general strain theory, Agnew, and all these things. But they all kind of basically come down to something in your life causes this strain. Your response to strain makes you a criminal. Okay? Now, the next one we're going to talk about is neutralization theory, or techniques of neutralization, as it's more commonly known. These 2 guys, Sykes and Matza, came up with these 5 techniques of neutralization. Okay? And they're basically, so this theory basically says that people want to be criminals. They just need an excuse, right? So there are 5 different classic excuses that people routinely use in order to let their criminal flag fly, if you will, right? So one of the common ones is denial of injury, okay? And I know you've all heard this one, because anytime you talk to somebody who has illegally downloaded music or movies or something, right? And you're like, dude, you know that's illegal, right? What's their response? Every time. Their response is, oh, I'm not hurting them. It doesn't cost them anything. I'm not hurting anybody. That's denial of injury. If you've ever known somebody who was a shoplifter, shoplifts, candy bars from Walmart, right? Oh, I'm just stealing some. It's worth under $1 at Walmart, billions of dollars a year. That is denial of injury, right? Another one is denial of the victim, right? It was their fault, right? He insulted me, so of course I had to hit him, right? She was wearing a super short skirt, of course I sexually assaulted her, right? That's denial of the victim. It's their fault, I victimized them, right? Another one is appeal to higher loyalties, i.e., God made me do it. It was, people who blow up Planned Parenthood clinics and the 9/11 bombers and all those things. Their excuse for committing that terroristic act is an appeal to higher loyalties. It's more important that, God's law is more important than me following the man law. Make sense? I won't go into all of them, but it's that kind of thing. It's making up an excuse for why committing crime is okay. Next one is labeling theory. And labeling theory is really interesting. I really like labeling theory. I'm not necessarily, in fact, I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's a good explanation for why people commit crime, but it's still one of my favorites. So labeling theory basically says when you're a kid, you do something wrong. And we were all kids. We've all done something wrong, right? Especially when we were a really young kid, we, hit our classmate or our sibling or something, or we take something that doesn't belong to us or whatever. But normal kids, this is a normal kid thing. Now, according to labeling theory, some kids get labeled as a bad kid or a deviant, or like, oh, I can't believe you're what a bad kid you are. Then those kids internalize that label. Well, if that adult is calling me a bad kid, I must be a bad kid. If I'm a bad kid, I need to act like a bad kid. So now I'm going to go hit more people and take more things that don't belong to me. And that ends up with them committing crime when they grow up, right? So labeling theory is about telling people they're bad, them internalizing that they're bad, and then them, based on that, acting bad. So it's a really interesting theory if you think about it, because what are the policy implications of that? How do we stop crime if this is actually proven, like, okay, labeling theory is absolutely the best explanation of crime ever. What do we do? Think about it, right? Interesting. Next one we're going to talk about is conflict theory. Essentially, conflict theory, there are a lot of sub-theories underneath this, but the kind of umbrella part of the theory says crime and the entire concept of crime was created by the powerful in order to make sure that the powerful groups remain powerful, and they're kind of there to stop the non-powerful groups from gaining any social or economic or political power. Okay? And again, there are subclasses of this. So, who are the powerful and who are the not powerful, basically. So, there is a class-based conflict theory. Okay? And this really started with a guy named Karl Marx. And if anybody has read anything in political science or history or anything, you know the name Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx comes along, and he's kind of one of the first conflict theorists, really. He's based on his work. And that original Marxist theory basically says, look, the rich set the law, and they set it up in such a way that the rich are very rarely, if ever, prosecuted for crime, and when they do, they face lighter sentences, and they're really not that big a deal. But when the poor commit crime, it's this massive thing, huge punishments, lots of investigation, lots of focus, right? Specifically to keep the poor poor and the rich rich. And I know Karl Marx, I know that name carries a lot of baggage, if you will. Like, I'm sure as soon as I said the name, a lot of you were like, Karl Marx, this must be nonsense. But there is actually a lot of evidence for this if you look around. Rich people do not face nearly the criminal punishments that poor people do, especially if you look at the economic impact of their crimes or the kind of equivalent crimes that they commit, right? People go to prison for 10 years for having marijuana on them, but a rich kid rapes one of his classmates, and he gets 90 days of probation. It is absolutely a thing. If you want to watch a movie that illustrates this a little bit, you should watch The Wolf of Wall Street with Leonardo DiCaprio. Spoiler alert, it is very, very not for children. So make sure you are over 18, and everybody in the room is over 18 if you want to watch it. but it does do a good job showing how kind of the rich can get away with things that the poor really can't, right? Which is kind of evidence for this conflict theory. Another conflict theory is based on gender, right? So men have the power, women don't. And this obviously doesn't explain all crime, because men are punished far more than women for certain crime, for crime overall, right? Because men commit far more crime overall than women. But there are places where this makes a lot of sense. For instance, when kids run away, right? That is a crime. You are not legally allowed to run away if you're a child. So who do you think runs away more, boys or girls? It's boys. Not even close. Boys run away way more often than girls. But who gets reported for running away more? Girls. Even though boys run away more, girls get reported for running away more, because a feminist conflict theorist would say that boys running away isn't that big a deal, because the parents don't own the boy. They're not, the boy is not a resource. Whereas when girls run away, they are losing something valuable. They are losing something economically valuable, and thus they want that value back. Okay. Similarly, when husbands kill wives, there is usually much less of a legal punishment than when wives kill husbands. This is a documented thing. You can look it up, the stats, if you want. So there is a disparate impact based on gender. There's also a conflict theory based on race, i.e., white people have the power, minority groups such as African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics, those kind of groups are the powerless. The system is set up to keep white people in power and have a lesser impact on white criminals than on African American, Hispanic, etc. criminals. You can see this in cocaine laws. Okay, so we've all heard of cocaine, white powdery substance, and then there's another form of cocaine. It's the exact same drug, just in a different form, called crack cocaine, right? Now, in the 80s, which is when crack was really, really big, there was the view that essentially white people do powder cocaine, black people do crack cocaine. How accurate that was, I'm not sure, but that was the stereotype. That was the view of society. They wrote drug laws about how each of those drugs should be punished. And the amount of powder cocaine to become a felony, right? So low amounts were misdemeanor, high amounts are a felony. For powder cocaine, the amount that is required to become a felony was 100 times the amount of crack that was required to go from a misdemeanor to a felony. So there was a huge racial disparate impact based on these two separate laws about how much of each drug it took to become a felony. And that had laws like that have a very incredibly disparate impact on African Americans, as we discussed in the last section. So those are conflict theories. Essentially, the powerful are setting up the entire system to remain powerful. Okay? And then finally, the last thing we're going to talk about are integrated theories. Integrated theories are basically theories that take a little bit from this theory and a little bit from that theory and combine them into a new theory. Okay? And these are beginning to become more popular recently. So, they might try to combine, say, learning theory and social disorganization and put them together. And, we've got a new theory out of the kind of the propositions of these two older theories. But anyway, again, if you are a criminal justice major, which I hope you all are, you will see an entire semester, basically, just talking about these criminological theories. So I'm going to end it there. I will see you guys for section 3. You are awesome.